So when I was asked to introduce Michael, they said, tell us about Michael. And so I dutifully sat down and wrote out some really fun things about Michael, how I know him, what a wonderful guy he is, a couple stories to make you all laugh. And then they said, and your comments are part of the total 30-minute package that he has on stage. So I immediately tossed all those comments and thought, you know, save time, I'm just going to cut to the chase and introduce a person who needs no introduction, our District Attorney, Michael Dougherty.
Well, good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. It is great to be with you today, and I appreciate both the kind introduction from Bill and from Cindy. And as Bill highlighted, one of my goals for today is to talk about immigration in a manner that allows us to all understand the law, our rights, and our protections in this community and throughout the state of Colorado, while also giving you an objective presentation. I recognize this is a challenging and important topic right now, and it's also complex. But part of what I appreciate about the Rotary is that we're such a thoughtful group and we come together and thinking about ways to make our community better and stronger. And there's no group I'd rather be with in talking about this issue than you. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the Rotary Club presentation today. I will highlight a few things as I jump into this presentation. It's a number of Know Your Rights trainings we've been doing throughout Boulder County since 2018. So when I became district attorney, working with community partners like El Comité, and their executive director is here today, Lisa Moreno, and others throughout the community, we've been going out in the community and talking about knowing your rights and know what protections are afforded under the law. And as district attorney, I'm passionate about that. Since the start of this year, these presentations have been more important than ever. And we've been giving them both in person and virtually. So if you know people who aren't in the room today or joining us online, we have a virtual presentation coming up on August 12th. And there's flyers out in the lobby about the August 12th presentation, and people could join virtually, so they don't have to come to a public place or come down to the courthouse. And they could still tune in and learn some of the rights and protections that we have under the law here in the great state of Colorado. So what I want to highlight is I've been asked to talk about the authority and reach of ICE here in the state of Colorado, and what actions we're seeing by ICE, and what individuals in the community can do or can't do, and also what ICE is permitted to do under the law here in Colorado. Also, what are the rights and guidelines for individuals if ICE comes to your front door or comes to the business that you own? What things should you be aware of? And I'm going to make sure that I leave enough time for questions at the end. I also want to highlight, to me, the reason I've always been passionate about this issue is I'm the grandson of 4 Irish immigrants who came over on the boat with nothing but the shirts on their backs. Although I told my son recently that they came over with nothing but the shirts on their backs, and my son said, "No pants?" Seriously, yes, but I think he now understands what the point means. But in all seriousness, my grandparents came over here for the freedoms and opportunities that our country offered to them that they did not have in Ireland in the 1920s. And in a lot of ways, I am so humbled and honored to stand before you as the elected district attorney less than 100 years later, because they embody the American dream and the pathway that was afforded to them that is denied to a lot of people now. And through that pathway and their hard work, my grandfather working at a supermarket his entire time in Brooklyn, New York, and my other grandparents working incredibly hard, my grandmother cleaning office buildings and banks late at night during the night shift. Because of that, I'm here today. And that shapes who I am as a person, who I am as a prosecutor, and how I approach this issue. But I also recognize it's an incredibly difficult and challenging time for immigrants and for communities as we talk about these issues. So I'm going to start to talk about the law, and part of what really, I think, set it all off at the start of this year was around birthright citizenship. So birthright citizenship is in the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In fact, the first line of the 14th Amendment is there on the screen. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state within which they reside. So under the plain reading of the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship attaches to individuals who are born in the United States. To immigrants in this country. On the first day of his second administration as president, President Trump issued an executive order revoking birthright citizenship. And that sent off a shockwave, in part because it had been long held that birthright citizenship was guaranteed under the US Constitution. In fact, in 1898, there was a case that went up to the US Supreme Court, and I have the case cited there on the screen, and a quote from the US Supreme Court in 1898 saying that birthright citizenship is guaranteed under the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. And that had been settled in the law in the United States ever since. And people have built their lives, their families, and their homes around that premise and around that protection ever since. So that's why the possible revocation of birthright citizenship sent such a shockwave through people, because there are a lot of people living in this country who qualified under the 14th Amendment as citizens in the United States. So there were a number of cases that were brought after the executive order was issued. And I have here a quote from one of the judges, a federal court judge, who ruled that the action sought by the federal government, by President Trump, was unconstitutional. And you see there, and the reason I included this quote is this federal judge has been on the bench for 4 decades. He was appointed by President Ronald Reagan, and he said in his 4 decades, his 40 years on the federal bench, he's never seen a case as blatantly unconstitutional as this one. And you see the exact quote there on your screen. So what's interesting about this issue, and it's still moving forward through the court system now, and I'll just touch briefly on that, is there are nationwide injunctions issued by that federal judge and other federal judges. The US Supreme Court recently heard a case about whether federal judges should have the power in their individual capacity as a federal court judge to issue a nationwide injunction. And the US Supreme Court found that federal judges should not have that power to put a complete halt to an action by the federal government through the use of a nationwide injunction, and highlighted 2 things. First, it's the role of the Attorney General, and this is why the Attorney General is so important in terms of the position and authority they have. It's the role of the Attorney General to bring a suit on behalf of the state, and that individuals should come together for a class action suit if they were seeking to bring this kind of halt to an action by the federal government. So in response to that, a number of class action suits have been brought. In fact, in New Hampshire, earlier this week, a class action suit was ruled on by a federal judge as having merit and moving forward. In addition, earlier this week, a federal appeals court in California found that the action proposed by the executive order by President Trump is also unconstitutional. So the actual issue of birthright citizenship is going to be going back to the US Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court ruled on nationwide injunctions, but did not get to the question of birthright citizenship. That issue will be in front of the US Supreme Court. And having listened to the argument around nationwide injunctions, it seems like from the comments and questions by the justices that the US Supreme Court will be inclined to find the revocation unconstitutional. That's my best reading of how skeptical they were in the questioning of the attorney for the government during that presentation. But this really set the tone and tenor and has been responded to by many people across the country on all sides of this issue. So as district attorney, as I mentioned, we have an immigrant protection program, and since 2018, we've been doing community outreach and working with community partners. Part of my goal as district attorney, of course, is always to think about how best to preserve community safety and community well-being. So in addition to our immigrant protection program, we have a hate crimes initiative, we have efforts to reduce gun violence, and we've talked about that as a Rotary Club in the past. But I'm going to start by asking you a couple of questions just to get us grounded in what I'm going to talk about protections for immigrants. So here's my first question for all of you. Do you agree with me that when someone is a victim of domestic violence, they should be able to go to the hospital for treatment, call the police for assistance, and come down to the Justice Center so we could hold the offender accountable in that domestic violence case? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with me that that individual, that victim, should not face deportation because they called the police? Another question. Do you agree with me that a sex assault victim should be able to go to the hospital for treatment, should be able to call the police, come to the Justice Center so we could fight for justice for that sex assault victim without fear that they or their kids are going to be deported due to immigration issues? These are the things that ground me as district attorney. And to me, these are the focus that we have to continue to key on as we move forward in this process. And this is what we've been doing since 2018. And I have one other question for you, and it's a little more complex. But do you agree with me that in a case where someone is charged with a serious offense, they're a defendant in a pending case, that we should have the opportunity to prosecute that case to its fullest? And that person has the right to exercise their rights along the way and see that case to completion before that person is picked up and deported out of this country. Do you agree with me on that? Yes. We just had a case where someone was driving drunk and killed a mom of a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old. The guy was picked up and deported by ICE within 12 days with no notice to my office. That victim's family will never have their day in court and never have justice done. And he's now free in the country that he was deported to. So when we talk about public safety, I always want to make sure we see cases through to completion. Because it's not as though the United States has an agreement with the country that he got deported to, which was Mexico, that he's going to be tried, convicted, and held responsible there. He's free in that country. And this family is denied justice. So I offer those to you just as 3 questions as district attorney that have always grounded me in the work that we do when we talk about immigration issues and how they impact public safety and also community well-being. So that's why in Boulder County for years we've had protections in place, including with the sheriff's office and law enforcement. I really want to highlight the strong partnerships that I have with the Boulder County Sheriff. I don't see CJ here today, but you know who CJ is, of course, and Joe Pelly before him, but also the Boulder police chiefs. So doing a Know Your Rights training, for example, in Lafayette, a few weeks ago, I was standing in front of about 70 people, many of whom are immigrants in the community, talking about their rights and their protections in Boulder County. But more powerful than the district attorney being there, more effective than I standing there, or me standing there as the district attorney, is the police chief in uniform standing next to me, saying, if you're being pulled over for a traffic offense, you should pull over. Our officers will not ask you for your status in this country. And if they find out that you're in the country without legal status, we will not report you to the federal government. And then you should go to the courthouse and pay the traffic ticket if you in fact committed the traffic offense. And I think that's very important information for our community to have in terms of knowing their rights and knowing what protections exist. A lot of the protections that we've had in Boulder County since 2018 are now in law in Colorado for the entire state of Colorado. So I'm going to go through some of those things now and highlight what state and local agencies are prohibited from sharing with ICE absent a warrant issued by a court. So, for example, we learn in the prosecution of a case that a victim does not have legal status in the country, we will not report that person to the federal government. Or on a pending case, we will not report them to the federal government. That protection is now in place for all state and local public agencies. They're not allowed to share this information with federal immigration authorities. So one key part of this is around courthouses. So here in the state of Colorado, starting in 2019, courthouses, the adjacent areas, which are defined as sidewalks, parking lots, so forth, and also in the courthouses, ICE is not permitted to make arrest on civil immigration detainers. They can't come into the Boulder County Justice Center and make an arrest on an immigration detainer. It is prohibited by state law, and that is now the law throughout the entire state of Colorado. There are a number of remedies if this happens. First, the Attorney General can bring a civil suit against that individual or against the agency. And we saw something similar to this just in the last 2 weeks, where there was a Mesa County Sheriff's deputy who participated in a traffic stop, but was also sharing that information with immigration authorities. And the Attorney General for the state of Colorado, Phil Weiser, has now filed a civil suit against that sheriff's deputy. And this is where the protection comes from and the power to sanction comes from. Also, the chief judge for the jurisdiction can hold the agent or the agency in contempt of court. Finally, the individual who's arrested on an immigration detainer in or around a courthouse can file a civil suit against ICE. Those protections have been in place in Colorado since 2019. Those protections have now been expanded, in part because when President Obama was in office, there was an executive order issued saying those same protections are in place for child care facilities, schools, and hospitals. The logic being that people should be able to drop their kids off for child care, pick them up from school and take them to the hospital without fear of being picked up and deported when they're bringing their kids for essential treatment or services. When President Trump took office, he revoked that executive order. So in response, the legislature in Colorado introduced a bill, which I strongly supported, and it passed Senate Bill 276, which extended the courthouse protections to child care facilities, schools, and to hospitals. And we'll talk briefly about Senate Bill 276. There was a lot that went into Senate Bill 276, and I'm just going to hit on some key parts. Can I move around with this microphone? All right. I'm on the move, I think. That'd be great. I was once trying a case, and I was very fired up, and I was moving back and forth in my closing argument. I was sure I was making great points. I don't remember any of them, but they're very compelling. And the judge in the middle of it said, "Mr. Dougherty." And I looked up at the judge, and she said, "Do you like tennis?" I said, and the answer was not really, but I was like, yes. And she's like, "So do I. But I don't like watching you play tennis in my courtroom, so try to stand in one place just for a few minutes, please." I try to do that, so someone should yell at me if I start running around too much. Thank you, Marty. So Senate Bill 276, the real premise behind Senate Bill 276 is to make sure that state and local resources are not used in federal immigration. So for example, the analogy would be that if, let's say you have an issue with your taxes. The sheriff's office, the Boulder Police Department are not going to be tasked or asked by the federal government to follow up with you on the issue with your taxes. That's the province of the federal government. Under that same logic and that same approach, local law enforcement here in Boulder County and now throughout the state of Colorado is prohibited from participating in any federal immigration actions. And that's what Senate Bill 276 sought to do. One of the things they did was, and I think it's a key point, which to me makes a lot of sense, which is if an individual is scheduled to be released from the jail, so let's say someone in their family has posted bond, or they've served their sentence and they're scheduled to be released, jails in Colorado are prohibited from holding them past their time of release, just so that ICE can come pick the person up. I think that makes sense in that if my brother, for example, was picked up on a driving under the influence case, it would be a bad day for the Doughertys, by the way, but if he was, and I call the jail and I say, "I've posted the bond, when is he going to be released?" The answer should never be, "We're really busy today, so we're going to do it tomorrow." Or if he had served his sentence, you can't say, "We're going to hold him for an extra day." Under that same logic, Senate Bill 276 prohibits local law enforcement and county jails from holding individuals past their time of release. There's also protections within the justice system, probation, pretrial, community justice services, and so on, that prohibit them from sharing information with the federal government. Also, Senate Bill 276 does a couple things in terms of the sharing of personal identifying information. So what I mean by that is information about the individual that immigration enforcement agents may seek to use to locate the person. That cannot be shared by any of the, you see the second bullet point there, public agencies or institutions. They're prohibited from sharing that information with ICE. One important part that I care a lot about as district attorney is for years, well, let's just back up one step. There was a US Supreme Court called the Padilla decision. And in that case, Padilla, the US Supreme Court said that if someone was not informed of possible immigration consequences when they pled guilty to a felony or a misdemeanor, they can get that guilty plea back. Because that's one of the many possible sanctions that judges are supposed to inform people of when they plead guilty. So if you're in court and you're listening to someone plead guilty, there's a whole series of questions. And the US Supreme Court in the Padilla case said if they leave out something about immigration consequences, then the person can get that guilty plea back and seek to litigate the case further. We in Senate Bill 276 clarified that also includes traffic offenses and Class 3 misdemeanors and petty offenses. The law already covered felonies and high-level misdemeanors. Now it covers all criminal offenses in the state of Colorado. I will say judges overall have made this just a part of what they do now. So we're talking about cases from years ago where someone may not have been informed of their immigration consequences at the time of the plea. All public agencies, so if you work in a governmental agency or public library, information about what employees can share and cannot share has to be in a policy that is written and available to the public or the media starting on September 1st of this year. These were all protections that were part of Senate Bill 276. So let's talk about, for example, what business owners can do. Let's say you're sitting at the Walnut Cafe on the south side in South Boulder, and ICE comes in the front door. What can the restaurant owner do in advance? And what can restaurant employees do when ICE comes in? So a couple things. First, and you'll see this if you go to the Walnut Cafe on the south side, they now have a sign up. Right when you look at the kitchen, it says private area employees only. The reason that sign is there and the reason the sign is powerful is because law enforcement, but also ICE, are not allowed into private areas without a warrant signed by a court. So if you own a business, doctor's office, restaurant, whatever it might be, and you want to take steps to protect employees from possible immigration actions, you could post a sign that says private in the private areas, and then law enforcement and ICE would be required to get a warrant to enter that area. Also, informing employees, all employees have the constitutional right to remain silent. That is true for all of us. So what I mean by that is I'll stay with the Walnut Cafe as our hypothetical here. If you have some 21-year-old waiter working there, it's helpful for the employer to talk to that person in advance. If someone comes in and says, hey, is Joe working in the kitchen today? Have that employee prepared to say, I'm not allowed to answer any questions. You should talk to my boss. Talk to my manager. We all have the constitutional right to remain silent. You don't have to answer questions when asked. Also, practicing these things with employees, helping employees understand that what they need to be looking for if someone comes in, if ICE comes in with a warrant, is to make sure it's a warrant, that it says warrant at the top and it's signed by a judge. There's a difference between a warrant and a detainer, or a warrant and a request. The difference is warrant says warrant at the top and it is signed by a judge at the bottom. And that is a key distinction. You don't have to be a lawyer to know that or understand that. And I think that's really important to talk to employees about. And practice that with employees. So by practice, I mean it's like a fire drill. Just have them knowing what in advance what they're supposed to do if that ends up becoming an issue in their business, restaurant, company, or what have you. Also, making sure that if you have immigrants that you're working with or friends with, that they fill out a family preparation kit in advance. And if you need one of those, Lisa Moreno can help send one to you. I can send one to you. It's like what we have in our homes for floods and fires. It's a checklist of things you want to have in place. And for immigrants who have concerns right now, that list also includes what to do with my kids, what to do with my savings, because they're going to be gone with no notice. So they have to be prepared. And the more preparation they have done in advance, the better it is for everybody to pick up the pieces. But also, if they have an attorney that they could turn to or reach out to, or an organization that they've made contact with, that's the kind of information you want to have in that family preparation kit. One thing I would highlight too is just paying immigrants a fair wage. I just think that's something, I would have said this under any presidential administration. This isn't something that's new, right? Pay immigrants a fair wage for them and their families, and never take advantage of them is something I always talk about when I'm out in the community, and I know in this room I don't need to say that, but I think it's really important for us to be mindful of that now, because people are hiding in the shadows. And when they come forward to work and do their work, they should be paid for their hard-earned pay, just like everybody else. So I want to talk about masking for a minute. Do you agree with me that ICE should not wear masks when they make these arrests in our communities? No. Thank you. I'm trying to stay with the objective. My filter is going through a bunch of comments that come to mind right now. I do think, here's what I'll say. I think it cuts against the transparency that we expect and demand from all law enforcement in the United States of America. And I think the wearing of masks undercuts the confidence and trust that people have in ICE and in our government right now. And I want to see those masks down, and I want to see people identifying themselves, just like we expect the Boulder Police Department to do, just like we expect the Boulder County Sheriff's Office to do. This wearing of the mask has to stop. Currently, it's permitted under federal law. So let's talk about masks and some of the arrests that we see around ICE. So first, individuals can film but not interfere when ICE is making an arrest and taking someone into custody. So I was talking with a group recently, and they were asking me how many feet can they stand back without getting in trouble. And there's no set number. What I would say is you can't stand between an ICE agent and someone they're seeking to engage. You can't obstruct the action. If you do, you're committing possibly a criminal offense. And I would just want you to be mindful of that before you take any such action. But you can film ICE agents and then share that. You can also film their vehicles and their license plates if you believe they've engaged in misconduct. If you do that, just be aware a warrant is required to seize your phone. You do not have to turn your phone over to law enforcement when they ask you for your phone. So if the sheriff came in right now and went up to Marty and said, "I'd like to have your phone," Marty could say, "No, not without a warrant." Or if they took her phone and said, "Now you have to give me the passcode or put your thumb on this," the answer is no, not without a warrant. So again, it's a warrant requirement that protects us from law enforcement in all sorts of situations, but also applies here with ICE. You can also demand that ICE remove their mask and provide identification, but that's not required under the law currently. The Attorney General for the state of Colorado, Phil Weiser, has just filed a lawsuit demanding that ICE identify themselves and pull down their mask in the state of Colorado, and I strongly support that effort. That should and must happen. Let's just talk quickly about a couple protections we have under the law here in Colorado. One is wage theft. So I strongly supported the bill to turn wage theft from a misdemeanor to a felony offense because no one should be denied their hard-earned pay in the United States. There's now a felony offense in the state of Colorado for wage theft. And what I mean by wage theft is, let's say an unscrupulous employer is shutting down a business or a construction site and says, "I'm not going to pay you." They're often betting on the fact that the individual may not feel comfortable or are safe reporting that to law enforcement, and they're taking advantage of the individual. So wage theft is now a felony offense in the state of Colorado. And if the individual, the unscrupulous employer, says, "If you report this to the police, I'm going to report you to ICE," that's now extortion under the state of Colorado. We went to the legislature, I went and supported this bill and got extortion changed to cover the threat of immigration consequences as felony extortion in the state of Colorado. People should be able to go to the police and have justice done without fear of possible immigration consequences. And the actual threatening of immigration consequences is felony extortion under the law now. So you see there the specifics about extortion. The only other thing I would highlight about it is it often comes up also in domestic violence cases and sex assault cases. So years ago, I had a case with two sisters. They had come into the country without legal status from Mexico, and they were being repeatedly sexually assaulted, including the 17-year-old younger sister. And the guy threatened each of them that if you report this to the police, I'm going to report you to ICE. Under the law in Colorado, that would now be felony extortion in addition to all the other sex offenses that we would charge. So a couple things as I summarize here that I want to emphasize, and I'll stop and take any questions you have. One is law enforcement cannot hold people for ICE past their scheduled release date. And for each of these, I've included the statute number and also the bill number so that you can look it up and have it as a reference. Law enforcement at the state and local level cannot arrest individuals on immigration violations. So for example, the sheriff's office is not permitted, they're not legally authorized to arrest or hold someone on an immigration violation. Also, local jails are now prohibited from entering into contracts with the federal government to hold individuals for ICE. That is prohibited by the law in the state of Colorado. I talked about courthouses and how that's now been expanded to childcare, hospitals, and also schools. And there are protections for individuals in custody. These are two, I think, really interesting and powerful things. One is every person booked into the jail, if ICE seeks to talk to them, They have to be informed by the individuals working at the jail that they have a right to remain silent. They don't have to answer the questions even when they're in the custody of the jail. And next is if someone posts the bond, and just to take a quick step back, let's go back to my now wayward brother. He's actually never been in trouble, just for the record. But if I post bond for my brother and he gets out, if he keeps going to court, makes every court appearance, I get that money back at the end of the case. People, though, had posted bond and then had their loved one, the defendant, removed from the country by ICE, and they weren't getting the bond money back. And the concern being then they would not be willing to post bond because they're worried about possible deportation. So we got the law changed in Colorado that if the reason they fail to appear for court is because they've been deported, so they've been removed from the country and they can't appear, the bond will be returned to the individual who posted the bond. So that's another protection we put in place. So these are some of the things that I think are really important to be aware of under the law in Colorado, especially given the serious and troubling challenges we face in our country right now. I'm often asked what people can do. These are some of the things you can do. The other thing I would stress is we have nonprofits throughout Boulder County and throughout Colorado that work incredibly hard on behalf of immigrants and their families. Lisa Moreno, Lisa, can I ask you to stand up for a second? She's the executive director of El Comite, and she's an amazing warrior for justice. So we didn't plan on this in advance, and she's gonna, her face is already blushing a little bit, but I will say one thing we can do as we decide what nonprofits to donate to this year is to help agencies and organizations like El Comite. Because right now they're overwhelmed. So if you're reaching out to them and calling them, and can I ask you a quick question? How many staff members do you have? 7 full-time. That's it. So if you're looking for nonprofits to support or to support more this year, it doesn't have to be just El Comite, but I would just encourage folks, especially when we have grant funding and other funding being jeopardized for local nonprofits. That's the other thing I would offer in addition to what I've shared. Why don't I stop there and leave time for questions? What questions do you have for me?
Yes, can you clarify for me if a class action suit is filed in one state, would the result just apply to that state or the whole country?
So the question is class action suit, it would then apply to the whole country.
If you could put your hand up if you have a question.
My question is, if we're losing all this revenue and you're giving back people's bail money and not prosecuting them, is there a way to go after the federal government for the money that the state and the citizens are kind of paying for this process?
Interesting question. So I would say the number of cases where we're not prosecuting them is not significant enough or not large enough that we could submit some kind of bill to the federal government. And I would have trouble articulating what money we lost as a result. What we've lost is justice and public safety. So when the drunk driver gets deported, our office isn't out any money. What we're out of is the opportunity to bring justice for the family. On the bond situation, arguably that bond could be part of a compensation, but again, it's from the state returning the money to the individual. So I don't think that's where we're gonna succeed in litigation, but you hit on something really important, which is the funding that we get from the federal government and how reliant we are on the federal government. And I think that has to continue to be a focus in making sure that any change to the funding in Colorado is coming from Congress and not from the president. When you look at the powers of the White House and the powers of Congress, any changes to funding have to be through Congress.
Sure. Thank you, by the way. This is incredible. My question is, all this information and what you're doing is awesome, right? How is this being disseminated to everybody else, right? Like, this is the first time I'm hearing all this stuff, right? It's wonderful what you're doing. Make sense? How can we distribute this to our friends, or how are you distributing this?
Well, thank you. It is a priority for us and for other organizations working in Boulder County and throughout the state of Colorado. So we're doing these Know Your Rights trainings throughout Boulder County and also throughout the state of Colorado. I'm deeply committed to it. One thing we're doing, as I mentioned, is virtual presentations as well. The advantage of the virtual, in addition to all the advantages you know about virtual, is if an immigrant has fear of coming to a public place, especially a courthouse, they can tune in virtually. So I did a virtual presentation on Know Your Rights to about 40 immigrants who were scared. And they gathered in someone's home, and I sat in my office and I did this same presentation with them, with an interpreter. And it's about getting the word out. So our next virtual one is August 12th, and we have the flyers out in the lobby if you're interested in getting that information. And we're going to make this available on our website as well, and you can share this information out. And there's a lot of community organizations that are sharing it out as well, but it is critically important right now, so I appreciate your help in doing that. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm involved with a nonprofit that gives away toys to needy kids in Denver. And one of our concerns as a person on the board is we're afraid that people might not come to the event to get the free toys because they're afraid. But do you think I can post this private property on the building that we get to use, that we lease, and will that provide some protection? And then I will probably be the person to stand up in case anyone came, show them the private sign and try and keep them away. But they're fearful, and they've been fearful for many, many years, and we want to just get toys into the hands of the kids.
Well, first, thank you for what you do. Second, I think it's helpful if there are community partners, particularly organizations that work with immigrants in the community, that you connect with in advance so they can get the word out to community members that they serve, that they can come to that event and they understand what the event is for. And then those private signs do help, because when the private sign is up, a warrant is required to enter the private area.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Would you please explain to us in a little more detail what the lawsuit is that Congressman Neguse and Crow and other members of Congress have filed against ICE, interfering with the congressional authority to review ICE facilities?
Yes, and Representative Hooton, thank you for your question. I appreciate you. And let me take a step back and first say this. This tax bill that just passed now has ICE as the largest funded law enforcement agency in the United States for the federal government. So I can tell you, working with the FBI on the Pearl Street attack, and then reading that ICE is receiving the highest amount of funding is noteworthy. Staying objective, Bill, noteworthy. But the reason they got so much funding, and this is going to lead to your question, Edie, the reason they got so much funding in part is so that ICE can carry out more deportation actions, but also to hire private companies to build detention facilities for immigrants. And I want to highlight that for a moment, because to me, private companies should have no role in the justice system or in government. And so Representative Crow and Representative Neguse, who are two champions for Colorado, they've been trying to inspect the immigrant detention facility down in Aurora. And under the law in the country, they're supposed to be able to show up and go in and do an inspection, because we have heard that the conditions there are inhumane, that people are being treated like animals, that they're not getting food, they're not getting water, that they're not being cared for. So Representative Crow and others have tried to show up and conduct these inspections or audits, and they've been denied entry. So Representative Neguse and Representative Crow have just filed a lawsuit demanding access to the immigration facility in Aurora and to the others that are going to be built throughout the state of Colorado. And I think that's exactly what we want to see in terms of what our congressional representatives should be doing to inspect these facilities. And I will highlight for you, we also at the state level have two private prisons still operating in the state of Colorado. those should be shut down yesterday. Profit should have no role in the justice system. And I think it's a shame that we have at the state level, for the Department of Corrections at the state level, they have private prisons because they have every incentive to put the profit in their pocket and not into the programming for those incarcerated within the facilities. And it's no surprise that they have a lower rate of success in terms of rehabilitation for people being released from those facilities than state-run facilities. So as much as I direct my ire at the federal government for the immigration facilities being run by private corporations, we should have the 2 state-run private prisons shut down and taken over by state of Colorado as well.
Thank you. You want to stand up? Sure.
Thank you, Michael, for being here today and for everything that you do for the people who are in this county. It seems pretty clear to me that masked agents are, occasionally at least, being lawless, i.e. they are ignoring the rights that you laid out and forcing people to either reveal themselves. And of course, you know, a police officer under any circumstances is going to be intimidating to most people. What authorities, if any, do you have to either suggest or order that Boulder County law enforcement intervene in situations where it's clear that the agent is being lawless?
So first, let me start with the foundational premise that no one is above the law. And if ICE shows up and they're acting in a manner that someone thinks might be unlawful, they should call 911 and local law enforcement will respond. Local law enforcement will not interfere if ICE is performing a legal action. In other words, they're acting on a warrant to conduct a search or execute an arrest. But if ICE engages in criminal activity, we would have the authority and responsibility of prosecuting the ICE agents who do that. So for example, yesterday down in the El Paso County area, ICE agents fired their weapons during a possible arrest that went awry. And I don't know much about it except what I read in the media yesterday. But that will be investigated, and if they committed the crime, then they should and would be prosecuted. And that is certainly what we would do here in Boulder County for anybody that engages in criminal activity.
So I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you just give us an idea of what is happening in Boulder County with ICE and how they are responding to the robust protections that you have beautifully put into place to protect immigrants?
Thank you. Interestingly, ICE has not been as active in Boulder County as other jurisdictions up to this point. I know that will change going forward. They've had some limited engagements here in Boulder County, but not as many as in other areas such as Denver and other jurisdictions. So we have tried to maintain a very close watch on that with community partners that we have and law enforcement, and we get reports of it when it does happen. And I just met with the sheriff and the chief judge the other day to talk about this exact issue. And we haven't seen as much as in other jurisdictions, but we're ready, and that's why we have these protections in place.
You know, I made a mistake. We can have one more question.
Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, do it. No. Oh, you do it. You have it? Go ahead.
There's a question online that they couldn't unmute for. It's from Chad. He says he's curious about the requirement of a warrant to take a phone or a device and how that is applied at border control at the airport.
Good question. So if the question is, why do we have to give our phones over when we're trying to go onto a plane? It's because that's a condition of us being able to travel. So that's why we have to turn over our phone. We don't get to just walk through magnetometer, and that's why we have to subject to the process of going through the magnetometer ourselves and so on. That's all a condition of our ability and our desire to travel. Still, even at the airport, when I put my phone in the bin, that doesn't mean they could pick it up and search it. They would need a warrant to do that. They can't do that without a warrant. Similarly, they can't force me to turn over my passcode. So this is something I should mention to you. Many people now have Face ID available to them. It's much safer to have a passcode that you punch into the phone yourself. and you do not have to turn that over absent a court order.
Michael,
Bobby.
on behalf of Boulder Rotary, of which you are a member, we're happy to have you today. And just in general, want to thank you for your efforts to keep us safe as you do every day and to bring justice in every single case that comes before you. As you know, Boulder and Rotary International is doing its best to eradicate polio around the world. In your name, Boulder Rotary is today donating 100 doses of polio toward the eradication of this dread disease. Thank you for being with us.
And I just want to thank all of you. I am so grateful to be a member of this club, and I'm honored to fight for justice and the rule of law. And many of you have asked me, like, how do you do it, or how do you get through some of the stuff you see? I could not do it without my amazing wife, Antonia, who's here today. So I just want to highlight. And as I stand here, I suddenly realize, why are you not a member of the Rotary? But we're going to talk about that.